Hi there. Well, today it's a quick video about the use of the Paul Howard sphere jig. But before I set that up and get going with it, I need to turn some cup chucks to hold the part finished sphere for when it's finished off. So I've got myself a bit of beech from the log pile, and I'm going to make a cup chuck for the chuck end and one that will slide over one of my tailstock drives for use in the tailstock side. So firstly, one for the tailstock, and I want to make a sleeve that will fit over the main part of the body and also house the slightly tapered tip. This is the hollow one that you use for making light pulls. It's very handy for lots of different purposes. So measure it up and drill a Forstner for the main. I want to make this a good fit, so I'm just going to widen out the hole to be an exact fit for the outer body, and also produce a sort of tapered cone hole at the bottom so that the hole of the head of the drive sits in there neatly. You'll note that I turned a tenon on both ends. That allows me to re-grip it in the chuck and turn the cup end on the end that is going to hold the sphere. Cup chuck for the chuck end is much simpler. Just turn a tenon and then a little bit of wood with a cup shape. So I've got this piece of yew that I've measured up. It's going to be just under 100mm diameter after I've trued it up. So I've got the piece cut off a log at about 140 or 50mm long, something like that. The yew bark is too good to completely cut away, so I'm just making sure I've got some of the texture left in the sphere, so it won't be perfectly spherical. So with the ends trued up, just mark up the middle and measure it up and mark the size of the sphere bit, and then part the ends down to some nubs. The next bit is to measure up the sphere geometry points, mark up the shoulders at 29.3% of the diameter, and then cut a straight 45-degree angle off the corner. Those meet the tangent points of the sphere. If I was doing this by hand without the benefit of the jig, you'd then mark the 11% of the diameter across the shoulders of the four corners you just created, and you'd cut that as a tangent point as well, and then smooth off by hand. But now we're going to use the Paul Howard sphere jig.
This is the jig. That's the body. That's the cutter and the arm.
There's a washer that you make up to suit the gap in the bedway, which fits underneath so that the jig sits true on the lathe, and you then tighten up the little legs underneath with the Allen head bolts, making sure that the jig itself is set at right angles to the bedway, that the cutter is on dead centre, and that when you start off that the cutter is actually set at the middle line of your piece of wood. The jig allows you to position the shaft which the cutter sits on at different positions dependent upon the diameter of the ball. Up to about 300mm I think can be done, and you can adjust the cutting arm in and out for fine tuning. The bulk of the waste has been removed on the shoulders by cutting the corners off, but you still need to be careful and not to take too much off in one go with the carbide cutter. So you can move the cutter in and out to reduce the amount of cut, but the key point is that having set the geometry up to start with, the radius of swing will match the diameter of the ball that you want to cut. It's just a question of fiddling about with the cutter, reducing it if you're having too deep a cut, and then reducing it and going back and then finessing it to the final diameter that you set it up with to start with. The tricky bit comes when you get right the way round to the extreme limits of the swing, Paul Howard actually recommends that you stick jam glue blocks on the end so that you've got like, I don't know, 100, 125 mil of sacrificial wood either end, which does seem a right pain and faff when you just want to turn a sphere from a piece of wood that you've got. But I have to say it would be recommended, because at this point you can't actually swing the sphere jig any further to get into the corners. Obviously, if you extended the tailstock quill right the way out, that would potentially allow you to swing further, but you can't do much about it on the headstock end, because obviously the chuck gets in the way, and in my case the banjo, which I've left sitting under the chuck, also gets in the way. So at this point I decided enough is enough. I've taken the jig away, and I'm going to sand up the piece and then put it onto the cup chucks and try and turn the ends off. They're a bit bulkier than they should be, but that's all the patience I've got. So that's the cup chuck in the headstock. Just try and find, as I've got an inclusion, bark inclusion, a piece of the sphere that is kind of truly spherical, so that it will sit more comfortably on the sphere. I made the mistake for this sphere of not putting any protective neoprene or paper on the cup chucks, which I should have done, because it did mark the fairly soft U, which I had to then do a bit of hand sanding. So I suspect a few layers of paper towel or router mat would be quite successful. A nice sharp 3/8 bowl gouge to re-profile the nub ends, and then sand up and finish off. Although I wasn't trying to make a perfect sphere, I did realise that, and you can see it there, that there was some eccentricity on it. It's kind of like almost a lost cause if you have got a slight wobble in it, because getting it into the cup chucks means that, of course, the cup chucks have to be a perfect diameter, and you can see there's a slight run out on that. But I did go back with the skew, used a scraper, and just took off some high spots, and then sod it, just sanded the rest, and made it into an art piece rather than a bowling ball. Yeah, this was the bit of sanding I had to do to remove the dents from the cup chucks. Didn't take long, just a bit of 120 and upwards, just to blend it in. And then the combination of Yorkshire grit and good clean off, and then cellulose sanding sealer, and then a bit more Yorkshire grit, and then a bit of wax and a buff on the buffing machine. Soon sorted it out, and quite successful. I quite like the little inclusion. It also gives a fairly flat spot for it to sit on and not roll across the coffee table.